Chapter 4, Part 2. In the last 5 years, more than 100 schools had opened around the airport, some excellent and expensive, some fraudulent, some, like Manju's, taught by unqualified teenagers. But all were understood to be better than the free schools, like Merrill Municipal, where Asha was a contract teacher. Nearly 60% of the state's public school teachers hadn't finished college, and many of the permanent teachers had paid large, under-the-table sums to school officials to secure their positions. The corporator was among the politicians who preferred to capitalize on these abysmal schools instead of reforming them. He'd opened his own private school using a frontman. At Merrill, we play, take recess, play again, then have lunch, was how the Nepali boy Adarsh described the municipal school curriculum. The free lunches were the big draw. Adarsh came to Manju's school after his regular school day. Since she was always teaching something, often the plot summary she was trying to memorize for college. Her students didn't understand the plot of Miss Dalloway any better than Manju did, but they got that Othello was distrusted because of his dark skin. Now, actually, let me just mention that. Thinking about why the kids would understand Othello, they probably relate to it kind of being slum dwellers and how people perhaps distrusted them because of where they're from, similar to Othello. Now one of the other students flew into her hut with such velocity that a poster of Bal Thackeray, Shiv Sena's aging founder, fluttered off its tack on the wall. "Devo, you're early," Manju protested, "and you forgot to take off your shoes." Her eyes then moved from the mud tracks on the floor to his face, which was covered in blood. "Oh," the boy said, holding his head, "a taxi." Anawadi kids were always getting hit on the chaotic roads, usually, while crossing a treacherous intersection to get to Merrill Municipal School. New drivers talking on new cell phones could be a lethal combination. Manju leaped up, grabbed the turmeric by the stove, and poured the yellow powder over Devo's head. Turmeric, as good for wounds as for brides before weddings. She rubbed the spice until it blended with the blood into a bright orange paste, then pressed down hard. She was checking to see if she'd staunched the bleeding when Devo's one-eyed, widowed mother came through the door, brandishing a foot-long piece of metal. "No car will kill you. No God will save you. You went in the road, roaming loose like that, and now you will die at my hands." Devo darted under a wooden cupboard where Manju's family stored their possessions, and emitted a stricken, anticipatory howl. Pulling him out, his mother began to beat him with the strip of metal. "No," Manju said, "not the head, not where he's hurt." "I'll break your teeth. I will turn your flesh red," Devo's mother shouted. The fastest way to financial ruin in Anawadi was injury or illness, and the woman was already in debt to the loan shark who had financed the final hospital stay of her late husband. "If the driver had hurt you worse, how would I have paid the doctor? Tell me, Devo, do I have 1 rupee to spend to save your life?" So interesting culturally here. The mother, of course, is beating their child because he had done something stupid and run into the road. And where our bias would be like she gets out a metal rod and she beats him, and that's so horrible. But she's thinking about the bigger picture. If he does this and wastes their little bit of money they have to survive, that's not okay. And she has to find a way to get this kid not to spend all their money that the whole family needs for survival. And so we have to think morally, our values, is this okay to use this as a form of fear in order to protect the future of the family? "Stop," Manju cried, trying and failing to catch the woman's hand. Rahul, awake now, rolled his eyes. He considered the hut school a magnet for family histrionics. In calmer moments, Manju could argue that parents were terrified of losing control of their children in a city where danger seemed to be multiplying, a city they didn't fully understand. And as much as Manju hated violence of any stripe, the odd thrashing, like the odd axe blow, could be effective in keeping a child close to home. Devo's mother had now moved past the point of constructive teaching, however. Manju lunged between mother and son, managing to capture Devo's mother in a hug. "Promise," Manju said to Devo, panting, "you will not go in the road again." "Will not," he got out between heaving sobs. "Now I won't make such a mistake." So maybe this mom is okay to beat Devo because now he's saying he won't do it. Fixing her one eye on Manju before departing, his mother said, "Tomorrow, if he does not sit with you and study, I will break his legs and pour kerosene on his face." Manju was staunching the boy's wound for a second time when a little girl said accusingly, "Teacher, you're late for school." Manju untied her dupatta, which was streaked with blood and spice. "Come, let's get the others." Left unattended in the house, her students could be as extravagant as her brothers with the fair and lovely. Manju always looked angry when emerging from her hut. Everyone who left her house got tight in the lip unless they wanted a mouthful of flies. The only creatures in the slum enthusiastic about the stale goods in her mother's news store. "Class, come," she called out as she crossed the Maidan, stepping lightly around the piles of trash being sorted by Abdul. She knew who he was because Rahul hung out with his brother, Murchi, but of course she didn't speak to him. The garbage boy didn't speak to anyone as far as she could tell. So right now we're setting up some kind of relationship. We're bringing Manju and Abdul together. We don't know what it is, but she knows who he is and has an impression that he speaks to no one. So let's kind of keep that in the back of our mind and follow through what is the connection between Manju and Abdul. "Children, quickly now," she called, clapping her hands as she turned into one of the slum lanes. "Foot, it's late." Her official position was that having to round up her students was a bother. Shouldn't they show up voluntarily? In fact, she liked being outside, peering into doors and collecting snatches of neighborhood gossip in these minutes when the mantle of teacher protected her from rumor. Today's raging controversy involved clipboards that advertised Honda motorcycles from a dealership in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. The World Vision charity had intended them as gifts to 36 children it sponsored in Anawadi, but the clipboards were being hoarded by the social workers assigned to hand them out. Again, another sign of corruption that World Vision supposed to be supporting these children in Anawadi, but they are also taking things for themselves, perhaps out of a means of survival. Manju was always relieved to hear of local scandals in which her mother played no pivotal role. And again, we have that juxtaposition. Manju does not want to see that her mother is in a scandal, where of course she knows her mother is usually involved in most scandals. One by one, her students, mostly girls under age 12, emerged from their huts. Several of their sun-bleached dresses had broken zippers, exposing bony backs. Manju didn't worry about little Sharda. The girl was born spiny like her mother, who'd broken rocks on the road before her lungs went. Lakshmi was a painful case. Her stepmother reserved the food of the house for her own children. The brothel keeper's 11-year-old daughter, kitted in tight black bicycle shorts and dangling earrings, had her brother in tow. Both children liked to be out of their hut when visitors came to have sex, especially when the sex was with their mother. For many of these children, Manju's little school was no bridge. It was all the education they would get. The troop then marched to the hut of Manju's secret pupil, her friend Meena. Meena's parents kept the old ways about girls and education. Too much learning reduced a girl's compliancy. Manju had been teaching Meena English on the sly. One, we have two things set up here. We're looking at the cultural structure of traditional ways of thought about girls and education, and that you don't want girls to be too smart because then they're not going to be compliant. But then we also see a piece of Manju's personality in this action. So if we're noting on our tracker, Manju is teaching Meena English on the sly, but it says a lot about who she is as a person, that she wants to support girls and women and the development of their education so that they can also get out of education. So, it shows a strength that she has in her character that she's willing to take this risk. Meena, 15, had been the first girl born in Anawadi, arriving 2 years after her parents helped turn the swamp into a slum. She was a Dali. Manju belonged to the Kunbi farming caste, a backward caste but higher. Like most young Anawadians, the girls considered the caste obsession of their elders to be an irrelevant artifact. Manju and Meena had become friends because they both loved to dance, and stayed friends because they could keep each other's secrets. So both Manju and Meena are willing to put aside the cultural traditions of their families and move into a more progressive world. Now, seeing Manju in her doorway, Meena flashed a smile that was not her wide, thrilling film star smile, the one that other girls tried unsuccessfully to emulate. Today's smile was the go-away version, which indicated that she was on lockdown, allowed out only to fetch water or use the toilet. Her crime, as usual, was a failure to hold her tongue with her brothers and parents. Why couldn't she listen to the boys in the Maidan when they were talking about the hotels. Why couldn't she go to school? During the day, she did her household duty, but at night, fury sometimes overcame her, and her mother and brothers would feel compelled to beat it out of her. Such behavior could sabotage the marriage being arranged for her in their Tamil Nadu village. Manju routinely advised Meena to keep her discontents to herself, as Manju did. Still, the Tamil girl's defiance spoke to something inside Manju. This morning, as Manju was getting ready for college, the small delivery bindi she was putting on her forehead slipped and caught in the small of her neck. It glinted prettily there. Asha had already left for work. Manju let it stay. A girl could be virtuous without being perfect. So really interesting that Manju is looking at Meena as almost a role model of defiance and, supporting a woman's strength. And in her way, Manju is showing her rebellious side because the bindi, which is usually on her forehead and you should have for the day, has fallen and she doesn't put it back. She keeps it on her neck. So in that small action, it's a reflection of her rebellious nature. Back in the hut, her students arranged themselves on the bloody floor. "Good afternoon, students," she said in English. "Good afternoon, teacher," the children called back at a deafening volume. She paused, uncertain of what to do next. She didn't grasp enough of the way of the world to practice this plot with her students. That would have to be internalized later while she cooked dinner and before her mother started fighting with her father about being drunk. The day's official class assignment was the English names of fruits: apples, bananas, mangoes, papayas. She'd work to it gradually after a review of previous lesson on cars, trains, and planes. But first, since the children were poking each other, there would be 10 energy-depleting minutes of head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Her students' singing ran out across the Maidan. As it always did at this hour, Sunil, the young scavenger, liked to eavesdrop when he brought his goods to sell to Abdul. He'd sat in on Manju's class for a few days in January, mastering the English Twinkle Star song, before deciding that his time was better spent working for food. He was now taking the position that Manju's school was 2-bit games in a hut. Abdul, who considered Manju the most everything girl in Anawadi, could only wonder at the small boy's sense of superiority. One of Abdul's own arrogances, in these weeks before the one leg burned and everything changed, was that he could predict the fates of other people, especially scavengers. But Sunil's future was hard to make out. Although contempt was a force that changed a person, being a waste picker hadn't yet infected Sunil's mind if he still thought memorizing A's for apple might make some difference in his life. So very interesting that the author has ended this chapter about Manju with a paragraph connecting Abdul and Manju together. So at first we see Manju's impression of Abdul, but now we're turning it to see Abdul's impression of Manju, and that he looks up to her as the most everything girl in Anawadi, but he doesn't have the confidence like Sunil. He doesn't have the confidence to talk to her or to say anything. But we have this interesting line here, was that he could predict the fates of other people, especially scavengers. So in his kind of smallness and lack of confidence, he does have this belief that he can see what's going to happen to people. And so this, to me, I'm thinking kind of aloud, is this a sign of something to come? Is there something he can see happening to Manju? Is it like where, from this point on, where is their relationship going? Because the first 4 chapters are setting up all of our characters and bringing in the relationships with each other. So it makes me think perhaps part 2 is how these relationships developed.